Hi everybody, this is Della from The Beauty of Play, and today I'm going over a bookmaking tutorial. My daughter and I sat down to make a book together, and we started out with making the signatures. The first thing that we did was take a piece of copy paper and fold it in half twice, then unfolded it to use it as a template. We cut 3 or 4 pieces of paper in half, and then took that group of paper and folded them in half the other way to make signatures. We used maybe 4 or 5 signatures for this project. Then we took the signatures to measure a piece of cardboard for the cover. We're leaving about 1/4 of an inch all the way around. We want the cover to be slightly bigger than the signatures. I mark and cut out the first piece of cardboard, and then I use that first piece as a template for our second piece of cardboard. The cardboard that we're using is the cardboard that we get from our watercolor paper. So then we're using these pieces of cardboard as a template for the cover that's going over these cardboard. And on this, I'm giving about a 1/2 inch allowance. It's a little bigger than the allowance that I did for the signatures. I again cut out this sheet of paper, and then I used this sheet of paper as a template to make the second cover. Now she wanted her cover white, but you will see that we also put a beautiful edging along the side. So then we take our piece of cardboard and I'm placing glue on it. I make a little tab out of the scrap cardboard that I have to spread the glue onto the paper, but I make the mistake of leaving it a little too thick. And so for this first piece, you'll see it ends up having wrinkles. I also make the mistake of not turning it over and smoothing out the paper on the other side before continuing. I just glue in the edges here. So I take a little bit of glue, I'm spreading it along the edges, then I'm going to take the corner pieces and flip those up so we have a nice, even, neat trim. After I have the corners flipped up on these, then I gently fold over the edges and press those into the glued surfaces. I do these on all 4 and then flip it over and smooth out the paper on the other side. Now again, I made a mistake on this, and what I should have done is made sure the glue was very thin, and then I should have flipped it over and smoothed out the wrinkles before I proceeded with the borders. Now in addition to the cover, she also wanted an edge, and she's chosen this beautiful dark blue background with white stars, and so I'm measuring the length of that edge and marking that off and cutting it, and then I'm putting a very thin layer of glue on the paper. It takes me a little while to do this. I don't want it to be really thick because that will cause my paper to warp, but I do need it to be enough glue that it will stick to the surface and not come apart. So after I get the glue on there, I use the manufacturer's edge, because it's smoother than the edge that I cut, to go on the surface of the book. And I gently press that onto the front of the book, turn it over, and press the sides on to the back of the book. And I do this for both of the pages. I'm much happier with the second one. I don't make the same mistakes for this one. I make sure that the glue is very thin and it is evenly layered. In addition to that, once I put the paper on, I turn it over, which you can see just about now, and I smooth out the surface. And this causes it to have far less wrinkles. In fact, I'm not sure this piece had any wrinkles. And then I proceed like I did with the other, putting glue along the edges. I initially tried to do this to keep it nice and thin with the little tab that I'm using, but it turns out that it was too thin and it dried too early, and so I have to reapply glue after I get the corners down. And then after I get the corners down, I again fold up the edges on all four sides to provide for the cover. Working on that last edge, and then I'm going to work on the trim again. You can see on this one I forget to trim the trim, and I just put the edge onto the paper, again applying a thin layer of glue, smoothing it out so that it's nice and even and I don't have warps, but I forget to trim it, and what I end up doing is just placing it on and then allowing the glue to dry and trimming that cover later. At this point, I open my little book of bookmaking that is going to give me the instructions for doing the Copic stitch, the binding. That is the stitch that I'm going to use for this book. So the first thing that I have to do is take each of the signatures and mark off where my holes are going to be. I decide that we're going to use 5 holes, a 1/2 inch apart from each other, and it starts from a 1/2 inch from the top. Now the holes are not the same distance from the top and the bottom, so I'm having to pay particular attention here as to where the top and the bottom of each signature is, which is why I'm laying them so neatly and organized on top of each other. And then I use one of the signatures and a dark pen so that I can see the marks where my holes are supposed to be, and make holes in the same distance from each other, about a 1/4 inch in from the edge of the cover. At this point, we start making holes in our signatures. So I take a large needle that I have and I carefully poke the holes through each of the marked dots on each signature. Again, I'm paying attention to where the top is and where the bottom is, and I'm keeping my signatures organized. After I place holes in each one of the signatures, I work on placing holes in the covers. Because I don't have book equipment, this is a little bit challenging, and what I end up doing is once I have the needle in place, I turn it over and use the leverage of the table to poke the holes in the covers of the books. You may have noticed when I was making the covers of the book that I forgot to cover the inside of the book. So this is what I'm doing here, measuring and marking a sheet of paper that will fit on the inside cover. When making some books, the leaflet gets glued to the inside cover, but when using the Copic stitch, that doesn't happen. So here I'm applying a thin layer of glue to the inside of the book covers, and then I'm placing a sheet of white paper over those edges to give a nice inside cover. I do this on both of the covers. We have been working in double speed here, but I'm going to slow things down because we're going to start binding the cover, and this is a little bit complicated and takes some concentration. So after choosing the color and threading the needle, I take the first signature in the top hole. I'm going to place the needle in and pull the thread through, leaving a tail on the inside of that signature. Now this thread then binds the cover to this signature, placing the thread on the outside of the first hole in the cover. It takes me a few minutes to figure this out. You'll see I first put the needle in the hole through the back side and then realized that I need it to be on the outside. So I take it back out, place it on the outside, and then pull the thread through. I lined the cover up with the first signature, and you can see that there is a loop on the outside. I'm going to take my needle and run it through that loop from the top to the bottom, tighten everything up, and then I'm going to take the needle and run it back through that same hole into the inside of the first signature. After I get the needle through the first hole to the inside and pull everything nice and tight, I'm going to knot my thread with the existing tail that I left on the inside. You can trim the tail at this point, but I leave it here. And then we're going to work through the second hole of the first signature. So we're moving the thread from the inside to the outside. And then we're going to take the needle and place it on the outside of the cover, bringing it in between the cover and the signature. This is going to create a small loop that you can see on the edge, and I'm putting my needle through that loop, tightening everything up, and then I'm going to take my needle and put it back through that second hole that I came through. We'll continue this process with each of them moving into the third hole, coming to the outside, bringing the needle between the cover and the signature, bringing the needle through the loop, and then coming back in through that same hole. We also do this for the fourth one, and we do it for the last one, but the last one changes. We come out through the last one, and then we come to the last hole in the cover on the outside, like we did for the rest of them. That leaves the loop that we're familiar with, and we take the needle and place it through that loop. We do not, however, go back through the hole of the last signature. This is the end of the binding for the first signature, and at this point we add the second signature. Now this time we're going to be working from the bottom up. So when I take the second signature, I'm making sure that I have the hole in the bottom, and I'm going through the bottom hole, and that is the only stitch for the bottom hole. From this point, the needle goes into the next hole from the inside to the outside, and we work in the opposite direction but in the same way that we did before. So instead of going all the way to the signature, this time we're bringing our needle through the loop that was created from doing the first signature and the cover. Putting the needle through this loop is a little more challenging. And then after we have it through that loop, then we are placing the needle back through the hole that we came through and moving on to the next hole. I am a little too forceful in tightening things up a couple times, and I have some of the papers tear. So even though you need to keep things nice and tight, you want to be careful not to put too much force on it, or it will tear your holes. We're doing the same thing here that we did on the second. Have to untangle little knots, but we are moving from the inside to the outside, and then we are going to loop the needle that between that stitch from the first signature and the cover, tighten things up, and then place the needle back through the same hole. We're going to do that all the way to the end. And when we get to the end, we're going to follow through the same process, but we are not going to place the needle through the last hole. We continue to add each signature in the same way, alternating which direction we're working on. And the last hole in each of the signatures, the needle does not go back through the hole, but into the next hole of the next signature. This changes with the last signature and the cover. And again, we're going to slow things down so that you can see what we're doing. So the last signature and the cover are added together at the same time. And it takes me again a little while to figure it out, but we do this from first going to the outside of the cover and then placing the needle through the loop like we did with the other signatures. But this time we bring the needle through the two covers and then through the first hole of the last signature. And then we proceed the same way as before, but again, when we're going through the next hole of the signature, keeping things nice and tight here, we're going to go on the outside of the cover. We're going to bring that all the way through, loop it out. We're going to take the needle and bring it through the loop of the previous binding. And then when we have that nice and tight, we're going to bring that through the same hole that the needle came out of from the signature. And then we're going to move to the next hole, moving from the inside out, going to the outside of the cover, bringing that needle in between the signature and the outside of the cover, looping around the stitch from the previous signature. It gets a little more challenging. And then going back through the hole that we came out of the last signature that we're binding. We continue in this way to the very last, and we do go back through the very last signature. This is the last hole coming from the inside to the outside of the cover, bringing the needle in between the signature and the cover, looping that previous signature loop along the spine, and then we are going to go back in through the last hole to the inside of the last signature. And at this point, then we loop it under the thread already there and tie it off. And that is our book. The pages open flat. And it has a beautiful Copic binding on the side. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed the video, you can hit like, and if you'd like to see more videos from me, you can hit subscribe.